The Civil War itself also led to a huge population loss, either through death, injury, or on a brighter note, slaves escaping to the north. So after the Civil War, the state had lost its biggest industry, a lot of its people, and those who were left were sparsely educated and bitterly divided. At that time, 55% of the state's population were former slaves, and while they had escaped the terrifying reality of being property, conditions were still extremely bad for them in particular, because now they had to look out for themselves with no real resources or direction on how to do that. The collapse in the recorded wealth of the state at this time was also caused by something of a, well, there's no better way to put it, but adjustment in the way that assets were counted. Historians have estimated that as much as half of the wealth of the state in the mid-19th century was in its slaves, when they were just treated as an asset to own. Of course, after the practice was made illegal, the state lost that paper wealth. Beyond that, the environment itself that made Mississippi such a fertile agricultural area was also a major headwind towards any collective infrastructure development. Even to this day, frequent flooding, tropical diseases, tornadoes, and cyclones make doing business in Mississippi more difficult than in most parts of the USA. If two different people were trying to build wealth and one of them got their house knocked over randomly every few years, then the other person who is able to keep their home standing is going to have a lot more money left over to put into better, more productive investments. Scale this absurd situation to the level of a state, and that's pretty much the predicament that Mississippi has to deal with. The state has had to invest billions of dollars into flood protection across the Mississippi Delta, which is billions of dollars worth of development that other states could have put towards something that didn't just bring them back up to a level playing field. Despite these investments, the state still suffers regularly from huge economic damage done by natural disasters, damage that again needs to be fixed with money that other states could invest into projects that just put them even further ahead. Now, since there are very few barriers to the movement of capital and labour between the states and the US, there isn't much keeping smart people with their good ideas or wealthy people with their money in the state, instead of taking it anywhere else in the US where it will have access to better resources. Resources that also don't get blown over in a hurricane every half decade. But Mississippi's story was not unique. There were other states in the same region that dealt with the same combination of economic factors, and a few of them are now the most successful state economies in the US, so the next most important thing to understand is what kept Mississippi down. Now, it's important to note that while Mississippi has the unenviable title of the poorest state in the USA, that doesn't mean that it's a poor area as a whole. A statewide GDP per capita of around $47,000 is well behind the national average of $77,000, and even significantly behind the runner-up for last place, West Virginia, which has a GDP per capita of $54,000. But by GDP metrics alone, the USA is an astoundingly productive country. So being the least productive state in the USA is like being the worst driver on a Formula One grid. Mississippi has a per capita GDP higher than all but 21 countries, roughly in line with Germany, and it would be difficult to say that Germany isn't a productive country. But while this might make the good people of Mississippi feel a little bit better, this headline economic indicator doesn't really translate into reality, and it's actually just another thing that looks good on paper while working against the state in the real world. Mississippi didn't so much fall from the top of the US wealth rankings to the bottom so much as the other states just developed around it. Already we've explored how the state struggled to industrialise, and modern manufacturing is just simply more productive than even highly mechanised farming, which thanks to a similar set of conditions, the state also failed to invest in. By the time Mississippi did get around to embracing manufacturing, a lot of other states had already levelled up, so to speak, into advanced services like finance, international trade, and development. Mississippi became a low-cost place to get things farmed and manufactured by the big companies located in other states. Workers in Mississippi were still not that well educated by national standards, and they were desperate for jobs so they could be paid less. And everything in the state was also cheaper, so there was less pressure to raise wages. In a sense, states like Mississippi were the USA's China before China. But it also meant that when the world opened up to globalization, they were the first to get hit by outsourcing. A factory worker in Mississippi may demand lower wages and be able to live on less income than a factory worker in New York, Michigan, or California, but they still demand significantly higher wages than a factory worker in China. Outsourcing for the USA as a whole, from the top down at least, had been a good thing because US companies can produce their goods for lower costs while retaining the truly valuable jobs and most importantly the profits onshore. Mississippi, though, is home to no Fortune 500 companies, so there wasn't any existing organisation that could reap the positives of globalisation. It was just all side effects like lost jobs and lower rates of incoming investment. Mississippi didn't even capitalise on global trade by just being a place to do trade. The state could have been a major port centre as it connects inland waterways with the Atlantic Ocean, but again, its environment and hesitancy to make major infrastructure investments worked against it because deep sea ports were easy to build in Louisiana and Alabama. The ports in these states are now home to some of the most intense shipping traffic in the world, all in the same water basin, but just to either side of poor old Mississippi.